Hey, what's going on, everybody? Special guest here. It's Connor O'Gara is back again from Saturday Down South. As an Indiana grad, I had to get Connor on here to discuss the Hoosiers here. Connor, this is obviously it's exciting time for Indiana fans, but we're here to break them down. And for Miami fans who've been hearing all about it, this is obviously a huge matchup. It's really interesting. You and I both probably coming to the same thing of like we never thought we'd see this national championship matchup in the sense that Miami would be an underdog, heavy underdog in a matchup like this. But here we are. Just your general thoughts on this matchup, and then we'll kind of break it down from Indiana perspective on what they're bringing to the table here.
When we last talked, it was ahead of the college football playoff. And even with IU as the one seed and knowing that Miami could be playing with house money a bit after the way that it got in with the selection committee finally giving Miami the deserved benefit of the doubt over Notre Dame, I don't think either one of us would have probably looked at this and said, oh, yeah, that's imminent. Miami, Indiana national championship. Certainly possible, but definitely not imminent. And I think for those who have heard the IU story, the greatest turnaround maybe in the history of all of sports, it can't be said enough. And like my college experience watching Indiana go 13-35 and beat one FBS team with a winning record, it's hard to fathom how this team has been able to build a roster this sort of way. And I know a lot of people are talking about how old this Indiana team is, and it shows with how they play. If you take away nothing from watching Indiana play during the Kurt Cignetti era, what's very clear is that this team is always one step ahead. They're always making that right play. And even when they do make that mistake, they just kind of move past it and make up for it. And I've been comparing them to 2010's Alabama. That's kind of how robotic it feels at times. And now with the margin of victory that they've had in some of these games, people are like, man, is this 2019 LSU with the way that they're able to keep their foot on the gas? It's crazy watching what this team has become, knowing the historical hurdles that they had to overcome coming into the postseason, just trying to win a bowl game for the first time since 1991. I mean, it's crazy to think about where this program was a short while ago and where they are here on this stage as, in my opinion, worthy of being a favorite. At least maybe, we could debate that, whether or not it deserves to be 8.5 or whatever it is, but worthy of being a favorite in the national championship.
Yeah, I remember in college watching Indiana football, and really it was Antoine Randall L, and that was about it. Just kind of seeing with where the program is. Look, Connor, it is what it is. Indiana's here, Miami's here. As you mentioned, the point differential from this game. I think, obviously, the way Miami's been playing. Look, you touched on how the bracket has played out. I'll be honest, all season long, we've always known Miami, the national championship was in Miami, but it has not been discussed. Like, over the years, sometimes Miami players have talked about winning a national title, and yes, they're well aware of it being in Miami, but I don't feel like that's been the case. I think they just kind of surprisingly, they thought they deserved to be in, but they didn't really. It didn't really feel like they knew they would get in, but they got in, and here we are, and all of a sudden. After that Ohio State win, it was like, okay, they have a shot here. So for Miami to keep it going, and they've certainly played well. They've gotten some big time moments. You touched on the experience from Indiana. Miami's got some 6-year guys too that are leading the way too. So they've got some veterans there too. Let's start with obviously with Indiana. Let's talk about Fernando Mendoza. It's obviously a huge talking point with Miami, the Columbus ties, the Cristobal ties to his dad, but just what makes Fernando good? What makes him great? What's made him so great? And really a huge credit to Indiana and their staff to take a guy from Cal. Look, there were bright spots. We got to see it last year.
Yep.
He certainly played well against Miami in that game in a losing effort, but not huge numbers by any means for the season. But what's been so impressive about Fernando? What makes him great? And essentially, what's the challenge for Miami in this one in defending him?
Yeah, he's a microcosm of this team in every sort of way. Everything with him is on time. The timing routes that Indiana runs, it looks like a cheat code. That back shoulder fade to Elijah Surratt, if you were running that play over and over again in Madden or College Football 26, people would say you're spamming plays. This is just cheating. It can't be stopped. I don't know how you stop it. And then you factor in the other weapons that they have, being able to throw to a guy like Cooper, who obviously made like the catch of the year against Penn State, and Charlie Becker, who has just been so big time in the postseason, he has so many different options that he can choose from. And he seems to be able to work through his progressions extremely quickly. You know that he's a very, very smart guy, Kelly School of Business, and updates the LinkedIn profile. Like all those things are very well documented. But, how quickly he processes and is able to understand, oh man, a play breaks down. I need to be able to pick up a first down with my legs. He recognizes that too. And so that's why this IU offense has been really difficult to be able to defend. And, it's going to be such a fascinating matchup with the defensive line that Miami has, and whether or not they can get after this offense in a way that, with Trinidad Chambliss, they pressured him, but as Ruben Bain said afterwards, they didn't play Miami football. They pressured him 17 times and only got home once, and it happened on that intentional grounding on the first drive. You can't do that, obviously, against someone like Fernando Mendoza, who will pick you apart if you give him that time. So his rise, it's unbelievable. It does feel like we're watching a movie in real time. The fact that he's going to be playing against Miami, the campus, well, I mean, not playing on campus, but, it is the campus that he grew up less than a mile from and talked about walking there as a kid. I mean, it's just all these things lining up. It is crazy that it has happened in this way. And I certainly would not have predicted this in the preseason, but now in the postseason, you watch his game and he feels like as inevitable of a player as we've seen in recent memory in college football.
So certainly for Miami, they're going to, as you mentioned, they're going to want to apply pressure with Bain, Mesidor, the guys they have up front, maybe some corner blitzes. They're going to bring Keontae Scott like they've done this year at times. How do you see that matchup, Connor? Miami's defensive line, the offensive line, and kind of the protection that Fernando has there. It feels like, look, if Miami has a chance to pull off the upset, they're going to have to be good in this area. They're going to have to probably be great in this area to get Fernando, as you mentioned, off target, off schedule a little bit. But just how do you see this matchup? What does Indiana have up front? And essentially, how do you think they performed against other pressure defenses?
Well, they handled Ohio State's defensive line, but not necessarily in the way that they handled Oregon's defensive line. Lord knows those games had completely different feels to them. There have been questions kind of about the right side of that Indiana offensive line. Is that going to be the area that Miami's going to want to attack? And will Fernando Mendoza be able to recognize that and understand he needs to be able to get rid of the ball quickly? He could probably not have necessarily the same time that he's used to getting on that front side, and knowing that this could be a Miami defensive line that if you make that one wrong misstep, it's a turnover the other way, and that can be a game-changing play. So I do think that they're going to know that from an offensive game plan standpoint. I think Mike Shanahan's done a really good job quietly of being able to keep these defenses off balance. They can utilize tempo in a way that, not necessarily in the way that Ole Miss will. I mean, Ole Miss is so known for how they can use tempo, but I think that they're going to do things to try and mess with the timing of that Miami defensive line. And what's difficult is that they have that balance, the multifaceted rushing attack. I think Hemby has been such a revelation for that IU backfield. And so you can win these games wherein, you're looking up and going, wait a minute, when was the last time Fernando Mendoza threw an incompletion? He's got 5 incompletions in 2 playoff games so far. He's got 8 touchdown passes. Like this doesn't happen like this. So it just magnifies the need for, if those opportunities come up for a strip sack, you need to be able to capitalize on them. It's as simple as that. That's the path from Miami, is that you might not get a whole lot of those opportunities. And even if you do feel like you're taking advantage of maybe that mismatch on the right side of Indiana's offensive line, you still need to be able to get home, and you need to be able to get home in a way that has a game-changing turnover. That's the path for Miami to be able to pull off the upset.
I certainly want you touch on him. I definitely want to get into the run game, but let's stay with those weapons that Mendoza has. You mentioned them with Cooper and Surratt there, and Becker. What do you make of them? Cooper and Surratt, the touchdowns, both at least 13 for both of them, both over 800 yards, just really both over 60 catches. Very statistically similar players there, and then Becker at the tight end spot. And they've got some other weapons too, as you mentioned. But just what do you make? What do you think about those guys, and just what they're bringing to the table there from a receiving standpoint?
That's the thing that, man, I'm always blown away. The degree of difficulty that you'll see from Surratt, from Cooper, and from Becker is off the charts. They could be kind of forgotten about maybe for like a half hour of real time, and then all of a sudden, oh boom, it's Charlie Becker making a big time play. He had a touchdown that kind of blew things open in that Alabama game, and he had what I thought was the play that won Fernando Mendoza the Heisman on that 3rd and 6 against Ohio State to be able to clinch the Big Ten championship. And this is a dangerous room. I mean, it really is. They make high degree of difficulty catches, and I know that they don't necessarily have the electric factor of one Malachi Tony or anything like that. I mean, nobody's going to be compared to Jeremiah Smith in this game, but they're so savvy and they have this timing that is difficult to defend against. And so you have to find ways to be able to throw off that timing, because the versatility there within the passing game is just it is remarkable to see. And it can be the quick hitter stuff, and also they can be able to attack downfield, and they'll take risks. There was a lull in the third quarter of that Peach Bowl. I know the final score wouldn't really indicate it, but there was a fourth and or I think it was a 3rd and 3 play where they're going 35 yards downfield deep in their own territory, because if they see an opportunity, they're going to try and capitalize on it. And it doesn't always guarantee that it's going to happen, but they'll take their chances, man. They absolutely will. They keep their foot on the gas, and they're not one to necessarily tighten up. So I think that's what makes that trio of pass catchers so dangerous, and why they've been so productive during this unbelievable postseason run.
Just thinking about again, this is going to be a huge matchup with the receivers of Indiana, with Miami, with its secondary situation. Xavier Lucas with the targeting call,
Yep.
so he'll miss the first half. OJ Frederic only played a few snaps in that game. Now, Coach Cristobal said he's okay, so we'll see. So hopefully OJ will be out there. From Miami's standpoint, Ethan O'Connor's been a guy that has played a lot, and certainly been in the news from that last play against Ole Miss. But, Jabari Antoine, freshman there, he's going to be someone that certainly looks like they're going to be counted on there in that first half. He's got to be good, and it's going to be a difficult situation for him. But Miami, I think in that first half, they're going to need to keep it close in terms of, containing the passing game with Indiana, with what it has at the cornerback spot. Now, Miami and Damari Brown, a guy that they would like to have back, but hasn't played during all 3 of the playoff games. He started to come back from practice last week. So we'll see if coach said he's day to day, but we'll see if he can kind of get back in there. But a group that had a lot of depth throughout the season is looking a little bit shaky, at least not ideal. I guess is a better way to put it for this game, for at least for the first half. Let's go to the running game for the Hoosiers there. 12th nationally, about 220 yards a game. 6 times this year, rushing over 300 yards. You don't see this very often with a quarterback that wins the Heisman that has been so great, but they've got a rushing game that goes with it. How important is their ground game there? And, Miami's done a pretty good job all year long at stopping the run, so that'll certainly be a key for Miami if they can kind of slow down Indiana's rushing attack. But what do you think of their game there?
You saw Pat Coogan get MVP honors at the Rose Bowl. That's telling to me. I mean, the Notre Dame transfer has been so important for them up front. And to me, that kind of sets the table for what Indiana does with this 2-headed rushing attack. And then when Mendoza, you can't just turn your back on him in man coverage. I mean, that's what makes him really difficult, is that he can recognize that pre-snap and know when that time to be able to run. He has that mental clock. And so that's an added piece of this running game that probably doesn't get talked about a lot. But yeah, I mean, the addition of Pat Coogan and the way that this ground game blocks, sometimes you see these holes open up with their, they do this. I know Andy Staples has talked about this a lot, but it's like this duo blocking. And for those that understand offensive line play, that could probably get into the weeds a whole lot more than I can, but being able to then block at the second level. I know Miami does that as well. That was something they talked about on the broadcast of this Ole Miss game. And it's basically, man, they open up these running lanes that make it so that all of a sudden it's, what are these guys doing at the second level? That's the better question. And in so many games that IU has played this year, they're getting 7 yards a pop without even breaking a sweat. And if all of a sudden you're seeing that on the first and second drive, that's a really troubling sign for Miami. Because if that's available, all of a sudden that opens up everything else. And they have relied on that too. And I know there's been a lot of criticism on the Miami side of what Shannon Dawson has done from a play calling standpoint. Hey, you're getting too cute at different points. That doesn't really happen with IU in the way that they call plays. And it's something that's been a huge strength of theirs this season of understanding that they have those bodies. I think Hemby, the way that he runs, he just runs so hard, man. And I think he's going to be a really difficult guy to be able to stop consistently, and the way that Fletcher will be as well. I fully expect that to be the case, even with a ground defense that's been remarkable this year for IU. So, yeah, that battle in the trenches, I think we're going to get a really good indication those first two series kind of how that's being handled on the Miami side, and might determine the competitiveness of this game.
That's how it felt last game. Essentially, the first two drives of that Ole Miss game for Miami, getting out and kind of getting early stops. I think that really helped Miami, and that's what's been so interesting about watching this run. Yeah, Miami was the last team to get into the playoffs in terms of that at-large bid, but really in all three of these games, it's not been this, pull it out at the end type upset that they're pulling off. They're pulling off upsets, but they're controlling these games. They controlled the game against A&M. They controlled it against Ohio State. Now, there were certainly moments in the game where they definitely had to hold on. And it's not like they're way out in front like Indiana has been in their two games. But even the Ole Miss game, Miami's just doing a good job of kind of controlling the game. Even with those first two games, not getting over 300 yards of total offense. So they've had some key plays defensively, certainly. You touched on the running game with Miami. Yeah, Miami wants to run the ball, and it might be a little surprising that they rank 72nd nationally in rushing yards per game, about 154. But Mark Fletcher's been good in the playoffs. They want to run the ball. You saw it last game out. Miami had 51 carries. Even going under 4 yards a carry for the game, they're going to run the ball. That's what they want to do. They want to lean on that heavy offensive line that they have there, and they've got to be able to run the ball. I think that's a key for Miami in this one. They've got to continue what they've been doing in the other games, a little bit more efficient. You like to be well over 4 yards a carry, obviously. That'll be key. Just looking at Indiana's defense, you touched on stopping the run, but Carson Beck, and kind of what he's facing with the Indiana, that back seven, that secondary, how they defend the pass. What are your thoughts there?
You had to watch one play of the Peach Bowl to know that you can't make a mistake like that on D'Angelo Pons, and that to me is a guy who can very quickly turn a game on its head. And I think that this defense with Brian Haynes has just done a tremendous job of game planning. They always seem to be in the right spots at the right time. And I think what's really telling is that you came into the playoff kind of wondering, well, what's it going to look like without Stephen Daly? He was the guy that had 19 TFLs, was a huge addition from Kent State, and he got hurt celebrating the Big Ten championship. And they've just kind of kept moving without him. And you forget that he's not even out there. Like Kamara was the guy that was the preseason All-American coming into this season. He hasn't necessarily had the sack numbers, but he's been huge on that defensive line. And they have these guys all over the place that are just so experienced, and it's unbelievably disciplined. They do not miss tackles. That's going to be the biggest difference for Miami compared to what they saw against an Ole Miss team that missed, 17 tackles in that game. And it felt like any time they were able to get that bubble screen going with Malachi Tony, it was off to the races, and you could kind of trust, hey, even if he's in a tough spot where he's got some Taryn Perkins around his ankle, he could probably scoot free and be able to move the chains. And so that's the difference. You're not necessarily going to be able to bank on those yards. And it puts more pressure on Shannon Dawson to be able to scheme these guys open in space against a defense that once they get there, man, they don't let up. They really don't. And they group tackle and they do all these things so fundamentally well. And it's why they've gotten to this point. It's why they've been able to allow an average of 12 points in the playoffs. These neutral site games, they've allowed, I think, something like 12 points per game this season. And if you look at the previous teams that have done that in the playoff era, it's been like 2023 Michigan, 2021 Georgia, and 2018 Clemson, all of whom have won a national championship. So I do think that it would favor Miami if this was a low-scoring game, and even if that means some 3-and-outs early on, it's kind of frustrating. I think Miami would much rather play this game in the teens and kind of take their chances on what it looks like if IU's offense is having one of those frustrating days.
Yeah, and I think that'll be kind of the big thing for this game in general for Miami, to kind of get Indiana not playing like it's been playing, not getting points as easy as it's been, not getting the pick sixes. And you touched on the passing defense, as we just mentioned. Indiana's tied for seventh nationally with 18 interceptions on the season, and then tied for second, allowing only 9 passing touchdowns on the year. For Miami to pull off this upset, I think they've got to do things that kind of unrattle, just kind of like do something different to Indiana that hasn't really been happening. If it is those not getting, scoring points, or if it is, kind of preventing Indiana from scoring a bunch of points, whatever it might be, just something to get them off track a little bit from how they've been winning games. I think that's big. I think that's big for a team to pull off the upset of like, okay, it's not going to be that way in this game. I think that'll be important for Miami in addition to playing their style. They want to run the ball. They want to get Malachi Tony involved in the game. They want Carson Beck protected and completing passes at a high percentage, even if it is not much downfield like what we've seen the last few games. They're really kind of going with some high percentage passes and kind of just move the sticks. They had really long drives against Ole Miss. It was crazy to see. Look up Miami well over 30 plays, and Ole Miss was under 10. So that was a huge discrepancy, and to do something like that in this game, I think would be big as well. Connor, you touched on all the strengths that Indiana and all the things they've done well, and kind of you've thrown in what Miami will need to do. If I could kind of wrap this up, if some keys for Miami to beat Indiana, if you could pick out three things like, okay, this will give Miami a chance to win this game if they do these three things, are there briefly a few things that stand out in your mind?
I think a non-offensive touchdown would go a long ways. I mean, whether that comes in special teams or whether that comes in, one of those aforementioned strip sacks or something like that, that would be important. I think that if Miami plays the same game against Ole Miss with dropped interceptions and, talking about missing kicks and stuff like that and getting too cute and key down in distances, I think if they play that game against Indiana, they lose by 3 touchdowns. I really do. I don't think you can play with the sort of grace that Ole Miss gave them at times in that game. And I think dropping interceptions just can't happen. I mean, we're talking about a guy that has 5 incompletions in the postseason. Like, you can't drop multiple interceptions and multiple potential game-changing plays. That's the type of stuff that IU is just going to feast on if you do something like that. So I think that's just so unbelievably obvious. And, this needs to be a game in which you're able to control the time of possession. I think time of possession with Mark Fletcher has been so well documented with this Miami team. If you're able to keep this Indiana offense out of rhythm, that's going to go a long ways. Of course, we know that to be the case. And then you need to be able to get, for whatever reason, Fernando Mendoza just doesn't seem like a guy who is rattled at any point. He has the highest let me get this right. He has the highest quarterback rating in the second half and overtime of power conference quarterbacks with at least 100 such attempts in a season since Jaden Daniels 2023. That's the highest of any in the last decade that Jaden Daniels had during his Heisman Trophy season. He's clutch. Even in days in which it doesn't seem like the Indiana offense can get anything going, he's clutch. You need to find ways to make sure that he is at least uncomfortable in the second half of this game, because if he has any sliver of confidence, he can take advantage of that. So that's a lot, but Miami's got to play darn near perfect. I think that's the case. Can't be missing kicks, can't be dropping interceptions, can't be having pressures that don't get home. All that stuff needs to be corrected. Shannon Dawson's got to call a nearly perfect game. I think that's what it's going to take for Miami to be able to pull off an upset. I don't think it ultimately happens, just because I think IU has been bulletproof in this college football playoff so far. But I do think there is at least some path to Miami being able to get there, especially if those defensive linemen can get home and make it a long day for Fernando Mendoza.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Plenty more to discuss with this game. But Connor, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. This is great insight on the Indiana team here. And national championship coming up soon. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Connor.
Who would have thought? Anytime, man. Appreciate it.